She tried to tell me. Over and over, she opened up about how unhappy she was, how the cracks in our marriage were growing deeper. And every time, I brushed it off. I told her she was overreacting, that things weren't as bad as she made them out to be. I convinced myself it was just stress, just a phase. I never realized those conversations were her last attempts to save us. By the time I finally understood, she was already gone, and I was left with nothing but regret. When people talk about failed marriages, they usually point to the big moments: affairs, lies, explosive fights. But sometimes, the end doesn't come with fireworks. Sometimes, it's a slow erosion, a quiet unraveling that you don't even notice until the rope finally snaps. That's what happened to me. I wasn't cruel to my wife. I didn't scream at her, didn't cheat, didn't storm out of the house in anger. I told myself I was a good husband because I paid the bills, fixed the broken faucet, remembered her birthday. But being present physically isn't the same as being present emotionally, and that's where I failed her. She tried to tell me. I can see that now, so clearly it hurts. She brought up the little things at first, how lonely she felt even when we were sitting in the same room, how I seemed more focused on my phone or the TV than on her. She said she needed me to listen, to really hear her. And what did I do? I brushed it off. I said she was exaggerating, that everyone gets bored sometimes, that marriage isn't supposed to feel exciting every single day. I told myself I was being rational, grounding her when she was being too emotional. But the truth? I was dismissive. I was lazy. I didn't want to deal with the discomfort of admitting something was wrong, so I minimized it instead. I made her feel like her feelings were invalid, like she was asking for too much when really she was just asking for me. The conversations became more urgent over time. She told me she felt invisible, that she needed more connection, that she couldn't carry the relationship alone. Each time, I nodded, gave her a quick hug, and then went back to whatever distraction I was wrapped up in. I thought I had time. I thought marriage was unbreakable, that she would always be there no matter what. I was wrong. The night she packed her things, there wasn't a dramatic fight. No screaming, no shattered glass, no slammed doors. She just stood in the living room, suitcase by her side, tears in her eyes, and said, "I begged you to see me, and you never did. I can't do this anymore." I stood there, stunned, scrambling for words, but it was already too late. She was gone before I could find them. Now the house feels like a tomb, filled with echoes of conversations I ignored. I keep hearing her voice in my head, softer each time, until the only thing left is the silence I gave her in return. People think regret is about what you did. For me, regret is about what I didn't do. I didn't listen. I didn't act. I didn't care enough when she was still giving me the chance. And that's how I lost the person who once trusted me with her heart. It started on an ordinary Tuesday night, the kind of evening that doesn't stand out until you look back and realize it was a turning point. Dinner was over, dishes stacked in the sink, and I had sunk into the couch with the TV remote in my hand. My wife sat across from me, legs folded underneath her, eyes distant. At first, I didn't notice. Or maybe I noticed, but chose to ignore it. I remember thinking she looked tired, but so was I. Work had drained me, and the flicker of the television felt easier than starting a real conversation. Then she spoke. "I feel like we don't talk anymore," she said, her voice low but steady. I barely glanced up from the screen. "We're talking now," I joked, forcing a chuckle that landed flat. She didn't laugh. "No, I mean really talk. About us. About how I feel." That should have been my cue to put the remote down, to lean forward, to listen. Instead, I sighed, annoyed at the timing. "You're overthinking things. We've both just been busy. It's normal." Her shoulders stiffened. "It doesn't feel normal to me. I sit here next to you, and it's like I'm alone. I try to tell you how I feel, and you act like it's nothing." I remember feeling defensive, like she was accusing me of being a bad husband. And instead of hearing her pain, I argued, "Come on, it's not that serious. You know I love you. You're making a big deal out of nothing." Her eyes welled with tears, but she didn't cry. She just nodded slowly, like she had heard this script before. "That's the problem. Every time I bring it up, you tell me it's nothing. But it's not nothing to me." She stood up then, heading toward the kitchen. I stayed on the couch, pretending to focus on the TV while my chest tightened with discomfort. I told myself she'd get over it, that she was just emotional, that this was one of those conversations couples have and then forget about by morning. But I couldn't ignore the image burned into my mind. Her back turned to me as she rinsed the plates, shoulders slumped, silence stretching between us like a wall. That night, when we went to bed, she lay on her side facing the wall, her body curled away from mine. I reached out half-heartedly, placing a hand on her arm, but she didn't respond. I withdrew quickly, telling myself she just needed space, when the truth was she needed presence. She needed me to listen, to validate her feelings instead of brushing them off. I fell asleep believing it would blow over, the way little arguments always had before. But deep down, a part of me knew this wasn't little. It was the start of something unraveling. Looking back, that was the moment I should have acted. That was the night I could have chosen differently. Instead, I chose the easy way out: silence, denial, distraction. And that choice became the first step on the path that led her away from me. The weeks that followed were full of signs I refused to see. They weren't dramatic. No slammed doors, no screaming matches, just small shifts that I convinced myself were temporary. She started spending more time in the bedroom with the door closed, reading or scrolling on her phone while I sat in the living room. When I asked if she wanted to watch something together, she'd smile politely and say, "Maybe later." But later never came. Our dinners, once filled with laughter and small stories about our days, turned into quiet meals punctuated by clinking silverware. I tried to fill the silence with meaningless talk about work, sports, or the news. She would nod or murmur something back, but her eyes stayed downcast, her plate suddenly more interesting than me. One night, she said softly, "Do you ever feel like we're just roommates now?" I laughed it off, nervous. That's what marriage is, right? Comfort, routine. It's not all fireworks. She gave me a long look that I avoided. It's not about fireworks. It's about feeling seen. I remember feeling a knot in my chest at her words, but instead of leaning into it, I brushed it away with a shrug. "You're making it sound worse than it is. We're fine." But we weren't fine. I noticed she stopped reaching for my hand when we walked together, stopped asking me to run errands with her, stopped sharing the little details of her day, the funny text from a coworker, the random memory that popped into her head. It was as if she was retreating piece by piece, pulling her presence back inch by inch, and I stood there watching it happen without moving to stop it. There was one night I can't forget. She sat on the edge of the bed, holding her phone, and asked, "Do you think we'll be like this forever?" I looked up from my laptop, distracted, and asked, "Like what?" "Like strangers who live together." I chuckled nervously, not realizing she was dead serious. "You're being dramatic." Her face hardened. "That's exactly it. You never take me seriously." I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. She turned off the lamp and lay down, her back to me, leaving me alone with the glow of my laptop and a pit growing in my stomach. At the time, I told myself this was just a rough patch. Every couple goes through ups and downs, right? I thought if I kept things steady, kept paying bills, kept doing chores, kept pretending, it would sort itself out. But now, looking back, I see it differently. Those weren't just warning signs. They were red alarms blaring in my face. Every quiet dinner, every unanswered attempt at connection, every time she told me she felt invisible, those were opportunities to change, to step up, to fight for her. And every time, I chose the easier road: denial. I thought ignoring the cracks would keep the house standing. What I didn't realize was that the foundation was already crumbling, and my silence was making it collapse faster. The night it all came to a head was painfully ordinary at first. We had just finished dinner. Pasta, something quick she'd thrown together after work. I was scrolling on my phone at the table, half listening as she cleared the dishes. I remember the sound of water running in the sink, the clatter of plates, and me thinking about a deadline at work instead of the woman standing 3 feet away. Then she turned off the faucet and dried her hands slowly, almost deliberately. When she spoke, her voice was calm but carried a weight that made me look up. "I can't do this anymore." At first, I thought she meant the dishes. "I'll get them tomorrow," I said, setting my phone down. Her eyes locked onto mine, steady and unblinking. "No, I mean this. Us. This marriage." My stomach lurched, but I tried to laugh it off. "You're tired. You don't mean that." "Yes, I do," she said firmly. "I've told you for months how I feel. I've told you I'm lonely, that I need you, that I feel invisible in my own home. And every time, you wave it away like it's nothing." I opened my mouth, ready to argue, to tell her she was exaggerating. But something in her eyes stopped me. They weren't angry. They were empty, worn down, done. "You don't hear me," she continued. Not really. You nod. You dismiss. You tell me it's all in my head. Do you realize how painful it is to bare your soul to someone and be told it doesn't matter? I tried to reach for her hand across the table, but she pulled it back. The rejection stung, sharper than I expected. I love you, I blurted, as if that single phrase could erase everything. She shook her head. Love isn't enough when you don't act like it. Love isn't enough when I feel like I'm shouting into a void. I sat there in silence, a pit growing in my chest, searching for something to say. I wanted to promise change, to beg for another chance. But all the words felt hollow, because if I had truly meant them, I would have acted long before this moment. Finally, she stood up. I can't keep waiting for you to notice me. I'm done waiting. She walked past me, her footsteps slow but deliberate, and disappeared into the bedroom. Minutes later, I heard the sound of a suitcase unzipping. I froze at the table, staring at the half-empty wine glass she had left behind, my mind scrambling. Part of me wanted to rush in, to stop her, to throw myself at her feet and plead. But another part, the part too used to avoidance, just sat there, paralyzed, clinging to the hope that this was another bluff, another fight that would blow over. It wasn't. That was the night she packed her things. The night she finally stopped trying. The night I realized the conversations I had dismissed for so long were never complaints. They were warnings. Warnings I ignored until there was nothing left to save. The sound of the suitcase zipping shut is burned into my memory. It was so final, like a door slamming, even though no one had touched it yet. I sat on the couch, frozen, as if stillness could undo the moment, as if by not reacting I could somehow reset the evening back to normal. She emerged from the bedroom with the bag in her hand. It wasn't overstuffed, not dramatic, just the essentials. Clothes. A few toiletries. The look on her face told me this wasn't a trial separation. This was a decision. Where are you going? I asked, my voice small. To my sister's, she replied flatly. At least for now. I stood up, finally shaken into motion. Wait. Please. We can talk. We can fix this. Her eyes softened for a moment, but not with hope. With pity. I've been talking for months. You just didn't listen. The words hit harder than if she had shouted. I reached for the suitcase handle, desperate, but she pulled it back. Don't make this harder, she whispered. I wanted to argue. I wanted to beg. But my throat closed up, the words stuck behind the weight of every ignored conversation, every shrug, every night I chose the TV over her. What excuse could I possibly give now? She walked to the door, and panic finally surged in my chest. Please don't go, I said, my voice cracking. I'll change. I'll do better. Just don't walk out. She paused with her hand on the doorknob, her shoulders tense. For a split second, I thought she might turn around. Instead, she said, You only say that because I'm leaving. If you meant it, you would have shown it when I was still here. And with that, she opened the door and stepped out. The silence that followed was deafening. I stood in the middle of the living room, staring at the empty space where her suitcase had been, at the closed door that no longer belonged to us. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the apartment. I wandered into the bedroom, half expecting to see her unpacking, laughing at me for overreacting. Instead, I saw the empty hangers in the closet, the space on the dresser where her jewelry box used to sit. Her absence screamed louder than her presence ever had. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, surrounded by the ghost of her things, playing back every moment I'd brushed her off. Her words echoed in my head, relentless. You only say that because I'm leaving. For the first time, I truly understood what she had been trying to tell me all along. She hadn't wanted grand gestures or empty promises. She had wanted to be seen, to be heard, to matter. And now, she was gone. Because I had convinced myself there would always be more time, more chances, more tomorrows. But tomorrow's run out. The morning after she left, the apartment felt unrecognizable. The furniture hadn't moved, the walls were the same color, the coffee maker still sputtered to life at 7. But everything was wrong. The place felt hollow, stripped of warmth. Her absence clung to every surface like a shadow. I woke up on the couch, my back aching, clothes from the night before still on. For a moment, I forgot. I reached instinctively for my phone, expecting a good morning text, expecting to hear her voice in the kitchen. But the silence hit me all over again. I shuffled into the bedroom, scanning the space. Half the closet stood empty, the hangers clinking together like wind chimes. Her side of the dresser was bare, No perfume bottles, no scattered jewelry. Even her slippers by the bed were gone. She hadn't left in anger. She had left with intention. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the spot where she used to sleep. The indentation on the mattress was still there, but fading. I pressed my hand into it, as if I could keep it from disappearing. The guilt came in waves, relentless. I replayed every ignored conversation, every dismissive joke, every time I chose distraction over listening. She hadn't left suddenly. She had been leaving for months, little by little, while I convinced myself everything was fine. At work, I couldn't focus. My coworkers asked casual questions. "How's your wife?" And I fumbled for vague answers, too ashamed to admit the truth. The shame gnawed at me, not just because she left, but because I knew I had pushed her to that point with my silence. Nights were the worst. I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, hearing her voice in my head. "You never take me seriously. You only say that because I'm leaving." Those lines became a loop I couldn't shut off. I tried drowning them out with music, with TV, with long runs until my legs gave out. But the echoes always returned. I started noticing things I had taken for granted. The way she'd leave notes on the fridge reminding me of appointments. The way she'd hum while making dinner. The way she'd squeeze my hand when we crossed the street. Tiny gestures that stitched our life together. All gone, unraveling faster than I could gather them back. One night, I drove past her sister's house. I didn't stop, didn't knock. I just sat in the car across the street, lights off, staring at the faint glow of the windows. I wondered if she was inside, if she was happier without me, if she was finally feeling seen in a way I had failed to give her. I stayed there until I felt pathetic, then drove home to my empty apartment. The regret wasn't just about losing her. It was about realizing who I had been. A man who thought love could survive neglect, who thought loyalty was enough without presence, who thought there would always be another tomorrow to do better. Now I understood. She had been asking for connection, and I gave her excuses. She had asked for love, and I gave her silence. And in the quiet aftermath, I finally saw what she had seen long before. That love isn't destroyed in one moment, but in 1,000 small ones you choose to ignore. Eventually, the silence became unbearable. I told myself I couldn't just sit in the ruins, that I had to at least try. If there was even the smallest chance of saving what we had, I needed to take it. The first step was a message. Simple, careful. "I miss you. Can we talk?" I stared at the screen for 20 minutes before pressing send. No reply came that night, or the next morning. 2 days later, she responded with 5 words. "There's nothing left to say." But I didn't give up. I called, left voicemails, poured my heart into each one. "I know I failed you. I know I didn't listen. Please, just give me one chance to show you I can change." Each time, my voice cracked, the desperation bleeding through. Each time, there was silence in return. Finally, after weeks of trying, she agreed to meet. We sat in a coffee shop we used to visit on Sundays. It should have felt familiar, but the space between us was foreign, thick with unspoken history. She looked tired but composed, her hands wrapped around a mug she never touched. "Why now?" she asked flatly. "Because I see it now," I said quickly. "I see how much I ignored you, how I made you feel invisible. I hate myself for it. Please, I just want to fix this." She shook her head. "That's the thing. You only see it now that I'm gone. I begged you for months. I was drowning in front of you, and you looked the other way. I can't go back to that. I'll do anything," I insisted. "Therapy, counseling, whatever it takes. I'll prove to you that I can be the husband you needed." Her eyes softened briefly, but her voice stayed steady. "I believe you mean it now, but I don't believe you'll mean it 6 months from now, when the guilt fades and life feels normal again. I needed you when it mattered, and you weren't there." The words landed like a verdict. I reached across the table, desperate to bridge the gap, but she didn't move. After a long silence, she added quietly, "This isn't about punishing you. It's about survival. I need to feel alive again, and I can't do that with you." Tears burned in my eyes, but I forced myself to nod. For the first time, I understood she wasn't being cruel. She was being honest. And honesty hurt more than anything. We left the cafe without a hug, without a promise of, "Let's see where this goes." Just 2 people walking out in different directions, one free, the other carrying the weight of all the chances he wasted. That night, I sat in the dark apartment and realized that reconciliation wasn't just unlikely, it was impossible. Because trust isn't something you can bargain for once it's broken. It's something you either protect when you have it, or you lose forever. And I had lost it. Weeks turned into months, and the silence between us hardened into permanence. At first, I thought time would soften her anger, maybe open a path back to us. But with every unanswered message, every holiday spent apart, it became clear she wasn't angry anymore. She was done. That realization gutted me. Anger, I could have worked with. Anger meant she still cared enough to feel something. But indifference? Indifference was the end. For a long time, I tried to carry the guilt like a burden I could set down someday. I told myself if I learned the lesson, if I grew from it, maybe the weight would ease. But guilt doesn't just fade. It reshapes you. It carves itself into your identity until you can't tell where you end and it begins. I started noticing it in small ways. At work, I became hyper-aware of people's tones, terrified of dismissing someone the way I had dismissed her. Friends would vent about their problems, and I would overcompensate, listening so intently it made them uncomfortable. I was desperate not to repeat my failure, desperate to prove, to them, to myself, that I could be different. But no amount of better erased what had already been done. I would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying the last look she gave me before she walked out. The emptiness in her eyes told me the truth. I hadn't just lost her. I had lost the version of myself she believed in. The biggest realization came one evening when I visited my parents. My mother asked gently, "Do you think you'll try to win her back?" I opened my mouth to say yes, but the word caught in my throat. Because deep down, I knew the answer. It wasn't about winning her back. It wasn't about a grand gesture or proving myself through effort now. It was about the time I had wasted when it mattered most. I hadn't failed in one night. I had failed in 1,000 little moments. Every ignored plea, every brushed-off conversation, every casual dismissal. That's what broke us. And there's no undoing that. For the first time, I stopped rehearsing apologies in my head. I stopped drafting messages I'd never sent. Instead, I sat with the truth. She deserved better than what I gave her, and by the time I understood that, she had already saved herself by walking away. It hurt like hell, but there was clarity in that pain. I couldn't undo the past, and I couldn't chase her into the future. All I could do was carry the lesson forward, not as redemption, but as responsibility. Now, when people talk about regret, I don't think of one night or one fight. I think of the slow erosion I refuse to see, the way silence and neglect can kill something faster than betrayal. And I think of her, standing in the doorway with her suitcase, telling me the truth I was too blind to hear. Love dies when you stop listening. That's the realization I live with now. Not just that she's gone, but that my failure is permanent. And the only choice left is whether I let it destroy me, or force me to become someone who never makes the same mistake again. There comes a point when regret stops feeling like a wound and starts feeling like a prison. That's where I found myself in the months after she left, locked inside the walls I had built with my own negligence. At first, I tried to fill the silence. I picked up overtime at work, surrounded myself with noise, podcasts, music, TV running late into the night. But no distraction lasted long enough. The quiet always found me, pressing against the edges of my thoughts until it suffocated me. I remember one night sitting at the kitchen table long after midnight, the lights off, just the glow of my phone illuminating the empty room. I scrolled back through old messages from her, reminders about groceries, little heart emojis, the occasional love you in the middle of the day. I read them over and over until the screen blurred, until I realized I was clinging to ghosts. The bed became unbearable. Her side was empty, the sheets cold. I stopped sleeping in it altogether and moved to the couch, convincing myself it was temporary, that I'd go back once I felt normal again. But normal never came. Friends reached out at first. A buddy invited me to grab drinks. Another suggested a weekend trip. I declined, telling them I was busy, when really I couldn't stand the thought of pretending everything was fine. After a while, the invitation stopped. People have their own lives, their own problems, and I had effectively pushed myself into solitude. The worst moment came unexpectedly. I was walking through a grocery store when I saw a woman with her husband, laughing about something on their shopping list. It was such an ordinary sight, but it cut me open. That used to be us. And now it never would be again. The guilt twisted into something darker, self-loathing. I told myself I didn't deserve friends, didn't deserve another relationship, didn't deserve forgiveness. I had been handed love and loyalty and squandered it through arrogance and neglect. What kind of person does that? There were nights when I sat in the dark, wondering if I'd ever crawl out of the hole I'd dug for myself. I thought about moving to another city, starting over somewhere no one knew me, where my failures wouldn't follow me like shadows. But deep down, I knew the truth. You can't outrun yourself. The guilt would always come with me. One evening, I found myself standing in front of her sister's house again. I didn't knock, didn't call. I just stood across the street, staring at the faint light in the window, imagining her inside, alive in a life I no longer belonged to. My chest tightened, and for a terrifying moment, I considered crossing the street. But I didn't. I turned around and drove home, knowing that door was closed forever. Back in my apartment, I sat in the silence and finally admitted what I had been avoiding. She wasn't coming back. No grand gesture, no apology, no desperate plea would change that. And in that brutal realization, the weight of my failure crushed me completely. I hadn't just lost her. I had lost myself, and there was no one left to blame but me. Acceptance didn't arrive all at once. It wasn't some dramatic epiphany, no lightning bolt of clarity. It came slowly, in fragments, like tiny shards of glass I kept stepping on until I finally learned to walk carefully. I realized it the first time I stopped checking my phone every 5 minutes, waiting for a message that wasn't coming. Then again when I passed our favorite restaurant without feeling the urge to pull over. The ache was still there, but it was duller, less sharp. Not because I had healed, but because I finally understood, some wounds don't close. You just learn to live around them. One evening, I sat on the balcony with a notebook in my lap. For months, I had been carrying words in my chest with nowhere to put them. So I wrote her a letter I'd never sent. Page after page, I poured out everything. The apologies I hadn't given, the confessions I had been too proud to make, the love I still carried despite all the damage. By the time I finished, the pages were crumpled and wet with tears, but my chest felt lighter. That was when it clicked. This wasn't about getting her back. It wasn't about convincing her I could change. It was about changing because I had to live with myself. Because if I didn't learn, then all of this pain would be for nothing. So I started small. I made it a rule to answer the phone every time someone called, no matter how inconvenient. I practiced listening, really listening, without rushing to fix or dismiss. At work, I stopped cutting people off mid-sentence. With friends, I leaned in when they spoke instead of waiting for my turn. None of it erased what I had done, but it made me feel a little more human again. I won't lie and say the guilt is gone. It isn't. I still wake up some nights, my heart pounding, hearing her voice in my head. You only say that because I'm leaving. That line will follow me for the rest of my life. But now, instead of drowning in it, I let it remind me. Remind me of who I don't want to be again. Sometimes, people ask if I'd take her back if she ever showed up at my door. The truth is, I don't know. Part of me will always want her, will always wish I could rewrite our story. But another part of me knows she deserves the happiness I couldn't give her, and maybe that means she's better off without me. What I do know is this. Regret doesn't have to define the rest of my life. It can be the weight that breaks me, or the anchor that keeps me steady. The choice is mine. So now, when I think of her walking out with that suitcase, I don't just see the loss. I see the lesson. And while I'll never stop wishing I had learned it sooner, I carry it with me, not as punishment, but as a promise. A promise that the next time someone I love says, "I need you to hear me," I will put everything else down, because I know what it costs when you don't. Looking back now, the part that stings the most isn't the night she walked out with her suitcase. It isn't even the empty bed or the silence that followed. What hurts the most is knowing she gave me chance after chance, and I wasted them all because I thought I had endless time. Love doesn't usually die in explosions. It dies in the quiet, in the ignored conversations, the brushed-off feelings, the distracted nods that say, "You don't matter as much as whatever's in front of me right now." That's what I gave her. And eventually, she stopped trying to be heard. I used to tell myself I was a good husband because I didn't cheat, because I paid bills on time, because I wasn't cruel. But now I understand. Neglect can wound just as deeply as betrayal. Maybe deeper, because it makes someone feel invisible while standing right next to you. I still carry her voice with me. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I'll wake up and hear her final words echoing. "You only say that because I'm leaving." It's a line that cuts through the fog of sleep and reminds me why I live differently now. Do I wish I could go back and change it? Every single day? But life doesn't hand out rewinds. It only gives you consequences. And mine is living with the knowledge that I was too blind, too stubborn, too careless to see the person who loved me most slowly slip away. But regret, as crushing as it is, can also be a compass. It can either trap you in the past or push you to do better in the future. I can't change what happened with her, but I can honor it by refusing to make the same mistake again. Now, when people talk to me, I put the phone down. When someone says they're struggling, I listen instead of minimizing. It doesn't fix what I broke, but it builds something new inside me, a version of myself that maybe, someday, I won't hate quite as much. If anyone reading this has someone begging to be heard, don't make my mistake. Don't assume tomorrow will give you another chance. Don't let silence become the language of your relationship. Because once someone stops trying to be seen, it's already too late. I lost her not because I didn't love her, but because I didn't show it when it mattered most.